Hello, horror gang. I read the title and looked at the picture. Get your favorite drink. Don't forget to subscribe and like to support me. Let's begin. Eric was a 12-year-old boy living with his widowed mother in a small apartment, its walls crumbling with damp and permeated with a musty stench. Eric had known nothing but poverty and deprivation in his life. His father had died years earlier, leaving them a meager pension, barely enough to sustain them. Her mother struggled silently, trying to provide for their daily needs, pay the rent on time, and hide her tears from her son so he wouldn't feel her weakness. One gloomy morning, the postman arrived bearing an official sealed envelope. His mother opened it with trembling hands, her eyes reading the words like daggers piercing her chest. The news was shocking. Pension permanently suspended. She collapsed onto the worn wooden chair in the kitchen and gasped. Eric watched her silently, his small heart pounding, not fully understanding what was happening, but his mother's expression said it all. The days grew harsher, and the landlord began knocking on the door every week, demanding late rent. On his last visit, he stood at the door like an angry beast, shouting in a hoarse voice, "If you don't pay your rent within 2 days, I'll evict you." The mother trembled and tried to explain her situation, but he wasn't ready to listen to excuses. He slammed the door shut behind him, his screams echoing throughout the cramped apartment. Eric sat next to his mother, tried to hold her small, wrinkled hand, and whispered, "Mom, what will we do? Where will we go if we're evicted?" She didn't answer him directly, but instead looked out the window, her eyes wandering, as if searching for lost hope. At that moment, she felt the weight of the entire world on her shoulders, and she knew that the decision she was about to make would change her son's life forever. After hours of deliberation, the mother made a firm decision. They had to leave. She began gathering the few belongings they owned: old clothes, some utensils, a family photo of her late husband. They didn't have much to carry, yet the mother felt as if she was carrying a heavy load on her shoulders. Eric sat in the corner of the room, silently watching his mother's movements, his eyes following every tiny detail, as if trying to memorize the appearance of the house before leaving it forever. When night fell, it rained heavily, filling the streets with dark water that reflected the pale orange light from the lamps. Carrying the belongings with difficulty, the mother hailed an old taxi, its paint faded and its windows covered with rain mist. Eric sat in the front seat next to the driver, while his mother sat in the back, clutching a small bag to her chest, as if afraid it would be taken away. The driver was a middle-aged man with a kind face and sharp eyes that shone under the dashboard light. Minutes passed before Eric broke the silence and recounted everything: his father's death, the retirement pension being suspended, the landlord's anger, the decision to leave. The driver listened patiently, and when Eric finished, he smiled warmly and said in a reassuring voice, "Write down my number. If you need any help in the village, call me anytime." Eric felt at ease for the first time in weeks, as if that number was a tether to safety. But the journey wasn't easy. The road to the village was narrow, winding through dense trees stirred by the strong wind. The car's headlights barely penetrated the darkness, and whenever lightning struck, It illuminated the faces inside the car for a moment. Then everything went black. The rain drummed on the roof like war drums, and the sound of the wipers punctuated the silence with a steady, tense rhythm. After hours of travel, they finally arrived at the village. It was unnaturally quiet, with only the sound of rain and the distant meow of a cat. The driver stopped in front of an old house with black stone walls and a partially broken window. He turned off the engine, was silent for a moment, then turned to Eric, his eyes shining with a strange look he didn't understand. The driver said in a low voice, "Don't worry about the fare." The mother looked at him in surprise. No one had ever waived their fare like that. But the driver didn't look up at his mother. He kept his gaze fixed on Eric, as if silently warning him of something he hadn't said. Eric swallowed, not knowing why he suddenly felt a shiver run through his body. The mother and Eric got out of the car, grabbed their things, and headed toward the front door. Before the driver left, he said in a low voice, addressing Eric alone, "Remember what I told you. You have my phone number." Then he drove off slowly and disappeared into the fog and rain, leaving behind a heavy feeling that something strange was waiting for Eric inside this house. Eric carried his small bag over his shoulder, while his mother nearly collapsed from exhaustion, dragging her belongings behind her. The rain had let up a little, but the fog had thickened, so that the only lamp in front of the house illuminated only a small circle of ground. Eric stood in front of his aunt's door, his heart beating strangely fast, not just from exhaustion, but from a mysterious feeling he couldn't quite figure out the cause of. He raised his hand and knocked on the door just once. It opened immediately with a slow creak, as if the house had been waiting for them to arrive. He froze, feeling the cold air sting his face. There was no one behind the door, no one to greet them or to ask who was there. He looked at his mother in surprise, then entered with hesitant steps, his shoes clanking against the old wooden floor. "Sister, are you home?" his mother called out loudly. A faint voice came from upstairs, an elderly woman's voice, hoarse but clear. "Here I am, upstairs." Eric looked at the wooden staircase leading upstairs and asked himself in confusion, "So, who opened the door for us?" Mother quickly climbed it, smiling for the first time in days. Eric, however, climbed hesitantly, each step creaking irritably as if protesting his weight. When he reached the top, he saw his aunt sitting on an old bed near the window, her face wrinkled and her white hair scattered around her head. She looked much older than he'd imagined, as if the years had suddenly consumed her. Eric smiled a fake smile and greeted her, but his laughter came out forced, like a lifeless, dead laugh. Mother was hugging her sister affectionately, delighted to meet her. Eric's mind remained preoccupied with the question to which he had no answer. If my aunt is upstairs, then who opened the door? A few minutes later, Eric went downstairs to get some water. His throat was extremely dry. He entered the kitchen and was struck by a suffocating foul odor, a mixture of mold and something that had been rotting for months. He approached the sink, took a dirty glass, and began to clean it slowly, as if the friction between the glass and the sponge dispersed his gloomy thoughts. Then he reached for the faucet and turned it on. What he saw made his blood run cold. A dark red liquid began to flow from the faucet. At first, he thought it was dirty water, but the sharp, irony smell that filled his nostrils made him take a shuddering step back. It was real blood, warm, dripping onto the sink and splattering onto his hands. He took another step back until he almost fell, his breathing rapid, his heart pounding like the drums of war. He blinked vigorously, wiped his face with trembling hands, and turned on the tap again. But this time, the water was clear, cold, and calm, as if nothing had happened. Eric stood there motionless, listening to the sound of water dripping into the sink as if mocking him. He didn't understand what he saw. Was he imagining things? Was he so exhausted that he was hallucinating? But he was certain that the smell of blood still lingered in his nose, and that his heart hadn't stopped beating since that moment. He walked out of the kitchen with slow steps, and all the shadows of the house seemed to be watching him, laughing silently. For the first time, he felt that this house didn't welcome him, as if something evil had been awaiting his arrival for a long time. Night fell on the village, and the sky was plunged into a pitch-black darkness, interrupted only by distant flashes of lightning. The rain had stopped, but the sound of the wind whistling between the windows made the atmosphere even more ominous. Eric remained silent throughout dinner, staring at his plate without eating much. The image of blood flowing from the tap still haunted him, and its irony odor refused to leave his nostrils. When it was time for bed, he decided to sleep next to his mother, just as he had done when he was scared as a child. He approached her hesitantly, but what happened next shattered something inside him. Suddenly, his mother turned to him, her face grim and her eyes unnaturally wide. And then she shouted in a shrill voice he had never heard from her before. "Get out of here, Eric! Go and sleep in the other room! It's empty! Sleep there alone!" He froze, a chill running through his body. He hadn't expected his mother to yell at him like that. This was the first time in his life he'd ever heard her raise her voice at him like that. He looked at her in astonishment, then turned slowly, his steps heavier than lead. He picked up his small lamp and headed toward the second room at the end of the corridor. He opened the door, and there was a long creak, like the groan of a sick person. He entered. The room was empty, except for an old wooden bed and a corroded closet, dust covering the corners. He spread the blanket over the bed and sat down, his heart pounding violently. He turned off the lamp for a moment, but the darkness was so oppressive that he immediately turned it back on, as if the light were the last thread of security connecting him to reality. He stretched out on the bed, trying to sleep, but every sound in the house seemed heightened. The creaking of the floor, the rustle of the wind, the echo of distant drops of water. Then he heard something that made his breath catch. The sound of the door opening very slowly. A long, strangled creak, as if someone didn't want to make a noise. Eric sat up quickly, his hand trembling as he held the lamp, his face dripping with sweat despite the chill. He turned the lamp toward the door. It was half open now, swaying slightly in the wind. But what he saw next made him scream from the bottom of his heart. In the corner of the door, there was a face staring back at him. It wasn't an ordinary face. It was distorted in an unnatural way. Wide eyes and an inhumanly wide smile, and long, sharp teeth that glinted in the lamplight. The head was large and covered in blood, dripping silently onto the floor. Eric stumbled backward, slamming into the wall, a muffled scream escaping his throat, and the lamp fell from his hand to the floor and went out. For a moment, he quickly reached out and picked up the lamp again, trembling, his face wet with tears, and turned the light back on the door. But there was no one there. The door was still half open, and the corridor was completely empty. Eric held the lamp, panting heavily, his mind in a whirl. Was what he saw real? Or was the house playing with his mind? But the sensation that face left him wasn't an illusion. He felt like it was still watching him from the darkness. He sat on the bed, his eyes fixed on the open door, unable to move. The whole night passed slowly, like hell, and even the first flicker of dawnlight didn't give him any sense of security. He knew that what had happened that night was only the beginning. Eric couldn't sleep after what he saw in the room. The house still suffused with darkness, and the hallways felt like the breath of a being watching him. Around midnight, he felt an urgent need to go to the bathroom, but he hesitated. He gripped the lamp tightly, as if it were a shield protecting him from whatever was lurking there. Then, with extreme caution, he opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. The house was so silent that the creaking floor beneath his feet sounded like gunshots. He slowly descended the stairs, step by step, until he reached the first floor. As soon as he set foot on the cold floor, his blood froze. A man emerged from the kitchen. He was tall, in his 40s, with skin as black as a shadow, and his features were indistinct. He walked quickly and silently, passing right in front of Eric's eyes, then headed towards the bathroom, entering and closing the door behind him. Eric stood paralyzed in his place, the lamp trembling in his hand. He couldn't even scream. His heart was about to burst out of his chest. He barely convinced himself that this was probably a burglar who had broken into the house and that he had to take action. He approached the bathroom with trembling steps, grabbed the handle, and suddenly pushed open the door. The bathroom was empty. No man, no footsteps, no door opened from the window, nor any sign that anyone had been there. Even the air was eerily still. Eric felt his heart stop for a moment, then begin to beat terribly fast. He stepped back, not wanting to stay on this floor any longer. But before he could climb back up, he heard something else. The sound of music. It was faint at first, then it grew louder, coming from the second floor. Strange music, a mixture of childish melodies and a joyful party. But everyone in the house was asleep. He held the lamp more tightly and climbed the stairs carefully. With each step, he felt himself getting closer to disaster. When he reached his mother and aunt's room, he slowly bent down and looked under the door. What he saw nearly killed him with terror. He could see many feet moving inside the room, even though there were only supposed to be 2 people there. The feet of men, women, children, even the feet of animals seemed to be silently swirling on the floor. The shadows danced with the moonlight streaming through the window, as if the room were the stage for a sick celebration. His inner voice rose up, screaming, "Run!" Suddenly, the instinct to survive took hold of him. He quickly ran to his room, gathered his things in a hurry, grabbed his small phone, his heart nearly exploding with fear, and then left the room without looking back. He didn't even think about waking his mother or aunt. Something inside him was telling him that he had to get out now, or he'd never get out again. He opened the door and ran down the dark street, his legs trembling, falling and then getting up, the cold stinging his skin. He took the phone out of his pocket and immediately called the taxi driver. "Uncle, I'm Eric. Please come now. I'm outside. Please hurry." There was a brief silence on the line. Then the driver's voice came in a strangely calm voice. "Stay where you are, son. I'm in the village now. I'll be right there." Eric sat on the sidewalk in the dark, the flashlight in his hand illuminating the wet ground, his entire body trembling. The clock struck 2 after midnight. Every second that passed felt like an eternity, and the sound of the wind mingled with fake laughter in his ears, as if the house behind him was still watching him. Eric had barely noticed the taxi lights before he rushed towards it like a drowning man who'd found a lifebuoy. He quickly opened the door, got in, and sat in the front seat next to the driver, panting. The driver turned to him anxiously. "What's wrong, son? What's wrong with you?" Eric's voice trembled as he answered, "Let me breathe first. I saw something no human being can bear." The driver remained silent for a few moments, as if he'd been waiting for this sentence. Then he said, eerily calmly, "I expected that." Eric suddenly turned to him, his eyes wide with surprise. "What? What do you mean?" The driver sighed, as if he'd been carrying a heavy secret for a long time, then said in a low voice, "The house you entered has long since ceased to be a home. Its owner died 2 years ago. She was a witch known throughout the village, and ever since her death, people have avoided that place. They say it's haunted." Eric felt the ground shake beneath him. But my mother was with me. We went in together, and my aunt was there. I saw her and heard her." Then the driver turned slowly towards him, his eyes shining under the dashboard light, and said a sentence that froze Eric's blood. "My son, I brought you to the village alone. You had no one with you." Eric remained silent, his mouth half open, unable even to cry. The thoughts in his head collided as if screaming. "Impossible! Impossible!" he muttered in a low voice, as if his mind refused to accept what he had heard. The driver stopped the car suddenly on the side of the road, then pointed to a window overlooking a dark house nestled among the trees. "Look over there." Eric raised his head, his eyes following the driver's finger. In a small, neglected garden, under the pale moonlight, he saw something that made him lose his breath. It was his mother. She was lying on the ground, her body motionless, a small bottle by her hand. Her face was pale, her eyes half open, as if she were staring at her in her final moments. Eric's entire body tensed. He put his hands to his head and cried, "No, this is impossible!" His tears streamed down his cheeks, and his head was spinning as if he were about to faint. He began to relive every moment since his arrival, his mother's voice, her joy at meeting her sister, even her sudden anger at him when she threw him out of the room. Everything now seemed distorted, as if it had been a complete illusion. The driver put his hand on his shoulder and said in a sad voice, "Your mother, my son, couldn't handle the pressures of life. They say she drank poison weeks ago. Maybe what you saw was just her spirit trying to say goodbye to you." Eric listened as if he were dreaming, unaware of the driver's hand, the cold, or the night around him. Suddenly, he caught sight of the window of the house he'd been in hours earlier. A face appeared at the window. The same face he'd seen the night before, smiling, dripping with blood, staring directly at him. His heart trembled violently. He closed his eyes and began to shout, "Go! Get out of here now!" The driver pressed hard on the accelerator, and the car sped off into the darkness, leaving the house and the village behind. But deep down, Eric knew that what he had seen would never leave him, and that the night inside him would never end, even if he left the village forever. The years passed so slowly, as if time itself refused to heal Eric's wounds. Since that terrifying night, he moved in with the taxi driver, who treated him like a son. His childless wife welcomed him as a gift from heaven. She cared for him, cooked for him, and educated him, while her husband treated him with the firmness of a father and the warmth of a friend. Yet Eric's heart remained heavy with fear, and his mind remained trapped in that night that robbed him of his childhood forever. 20 years passed, and Eric was now a 32-year-old man, working as a driver like the man who saved him from the madness of that village. He supported the driver's wife, who raised him after her husband's death, and treated her like a real mother. But he never forgot what he had experienced. Every time he closed the door to his room at night, he felt something watching him from the darkness. That grinning face with its inhuman teeth still lurking around him. One cloudy morning, Eric woke up to a strange feeling in his chest, as if some invisible force was pushing him back to that village. He hesitated, but his curiosity got the better of him. He drove for a long time until he reached the village he hadn't set foot in for 20 years. The village was as he had left it, silent, cold, as if time hadn't moved since that night. Eric stopped in front of his aunt's house. Everything was eerily quiet. He slowly approached the window, then his heart stopped for a moment when he saw her. His mother's face. Yes, just her face, without a body. It floated behind the window pane, pale, covered in blood, the terrifying smile once again cracking her features. Her eyes were wide open, as if they were piercing Eric's soul, and her smile wasn't a smile of tenderness, but a smile of madness, the smile of something no longer human. Eric's body trembled and his chest tightened until he felt like he was about to suffocate. He quickly turned around, jumped into his car, and started the engine with trembling hands. As he drove away, he felt a strange chill in the back seat, as if someone was sitting behind him, silently watching him. He didn't dare turn around, but he heard a faint whisper in his ear. "You won't escape me this time." He pressed the accelerator as hard as he could, his eyes welling with fear. He didn't stop until he was completely out of the village. When he reached the outskirts of town, he swore in a trembling voice, "I'll never return to this village, ever." But deep down, he knew the curse wasn't over, and that the past still followed him like a shadow.